All right, anyone who's dipped their toes into modern web development has probably bumped into this classic combo, Django and React. They're an absolute powerhouse together, for sure. But getting them to actually talk to each other, that can feel like trying to solve a puzzle in the dark. So, in this explainer, we're going to flip the lights on and see exactly how this whole stack really clicks together.
It all really boils down to one fundamental choice. When a browser asks for a web page, what does the server do? Does it act like a classic chef sending over a fully prepared meal, I'm talking the whole complete HTML web page, or does it act more like a grocer, just handing over the raw ingredients, that's the JSON data, and trusting the browser to do all the cooking itself? It's that single decision, right there, that shapes pretty much the entire modern web as we know it.
And look, that core question, it leads to posts exactly like this one from Reddit. It perfectly captures that feeling, right? That struggle. How in the world do we get a powerful all-in-one website builder like Django to just stop and only send the data? And then what? What even happens after that? Okay, let's break it all down.
Okay, first up, Django. Let's stick with a simple analogy for this whole setup. Imagine our web application is a restaurant. Django is the kitchen. It's the backend. It's the engine room where all the really important work gets done. Totally behind the scenes, completely out of sight.
So, what's actually going on back there in the kitchen? Well, it's managing the database. Think of that as the pantry, full of all the raw ingredients. It does this with something Django calls models. It also handles all the business logic, basically the recipes for how the application is supposed to work, and that happens inside of views. It's even the bouncer at the door, taking care of security and authentication. But here's the key part, the last point on this list. Its job is to prepare and organize the ingredients. That's it. It has no say in what the final plate looks like. The backend is completely, totally separate from the user interface.
And that first big job, managing the database, is handled by what's called a Django model. A great way to think of it is like a blueprint or an order form for the pantry. It's just a simple Python class that tells the database exactly how to structure and store a piece of information. So, for example, a classic task model would just say, hey, for every single task we store, we need a place for a title and we need a spot for its completed status. That's it. Super simple, perfectly structured, and crystal clear.
All right, so the kitchen is up and running. Let's head out front to the dining room. And this is React's world. This is the front end. It's everything, and I mean everything the user actually sees, touches, and interacts with. It's the whole customer-facing experience from top to bottom.
And this comparison just lays it all out perfectly. The backend, our kitchen, lives on some powerful server out there in the world focused on data and logic. Meanwhile, the front end, our dining room, lives right inside the user's web browser, and it's obsessed with presentation. Django is speaking in database queries, React is speaking in user clicks. They're two completely different jobs happening in two completely different places.
Yeah, the front end is all about the user experience. Its whole world revolves around it. It builds the interface using these cool, reusable building blocks called components, kind of like Legos. It's constantly listening for every click, every form submission. And here's the big one. Its job is to go get the data from the backend when it needs it. It also has to manage the application's state, which is basically its short-term memory of what's happening right now in the browser. All of this work has one goal: to create that fast, responsive, almost instant feel that we've all come to expect from modern websites.
Okay, so let's pause. We have a kitchen, we have a dining room, and they are completely separate. So, how on earth do they talk to each other, right? This is the big aha moment. The answer is the API. And in our restaurant analogy, the API is our digital waiter.
An API, or more specifically a REST API, is really just a set of rules. Think of it like a contract that both sides have agreed to. The dining room, React, knows exactly how to phrase an order for data. And the kitchen, Django, knows exactly how to understand that order and prepare the food. The API is just that waiter, running back and forth, making sure every message, every order gets where it needs to go without any confusion.
So let's actually follow our waiter on a single trip from start to finish. It begins in the dining room. React realizes, hey, I need to display the list of tasks. So it sends the waiter off with an order to a very specific URL, an endpoint, like /API/tasks. The waiter arrives at the kitchen. Django gets the order, goes to the database pantry, and pulls out all the tasks. Now here comes the most important part. The backend serializes that data. That's just a fancy word for translating it into a super simple, universal format. The waiter then takes that simple data, carries it back to the dining room, and hands it over to React, which then beautifully arranges it on the page for the user to see.
So what does this food that the waiter's carrying actually look like? What is this data? It looks just like this. This is it. It's called JSON. And as we can see, it's just plain text. It's organized into these simple key-value pairs. There's nothing complicated about it. It's incredibly simple, it's lightweight, and pretty much any programming language on the planet can understand it. That's why it has become the universal language for APIs everywhere.
And that little bit of magic, the process that takes a complex Python object from Django's database and turns it into that simple JSON text, well, that's done by a tool called a serializer. It comes from a library called Django REST Framework. The best way to think about it is as a translator. Its entire job is to make sure the complex, gourmet language of the kitchen gets translated perfectly into a simple message that anyone in the dining room can understand.
Okay, so that's the how it all works. But what about the why? Why go through all this trouble? Why not just let Django build the whole web page like in the old days? Well, the answer comes down to the absolutely incredible power and flexibility that this separation unlocks.
The biggest win here is flexibility, hands down. Once that backend API is built, it becomes a universal data source. It can serve data to a React website, sure, but also to an iOS app, an Android app, maybe even a smart fridge. They all just talk to the same kitchen. This approach also lets development teams specialize. The front-end experts can focus on creating a beautiful, intuitive user interface, while the back-end experts can focus on optimizing the database and business logic. They don't get in each other's way. In fact, they can work at the same time, in parallel. And this idea of working in parallel isn't just a nice theory. It has a massive real-world impact. Some industry analysis have shown that this kind of separated architecture can slash development time by as much as 30%. That's huge. That's almost a third of the project time saved, which can be spent building new features instead of trying to untangle a monolithic code base.
This separation also leads to a much cleaner, more logical workflow. The process typically starts with designing the API first. That's like writing the restaurant's menu. Once everyone on the team agrees on that menu, the back-end team can go off and build the kitchen. They can test every single dish, every endpoint, on its own. It's only after the kitchen is fully functional and tested that the front-end team starts building the dining room, because now they have total confidence that any order they place will be handled exactly as expected.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Django owns the data. React owns the presentation, what the user sees. And the API is the simple, elegant contract that lets these two masters do their jobs perfectly without ever stepping on each other's toes.
So in the end, by separating the kitchen from the dining room, what's being built isn't just a website, it's a data engine, a single, powerful back-end that can serve up endless possibilities. The real question then becomes not just what will be built next, but how many different things can be powered from that one solid foundation.